Thank you. Wrong button. Might want to turn that down a bit. Good evening, and welcome to yet another day of trying to make that bloody printer work in Shenzhen I. Yes, because Gareth isn't currently trying to print something, I hope.
Still can't print. I can't print the filter printer from there.
Yeah. Weird. So yes, I currently have two designs for this printer, one of which works slightly better than the other, but neither of which is actually adequate yet. I'm kind of amused by the way that the previous one was labelled too many microcontrollers. This one has 8 in it. Did that one have even more? Oh, it only had 8 as well. But this one is closer to working. Like, this one is... Its only failing is that when printing from right to left, it prints what it should print when moving from left to right. Which, were it not for the fact that we don't have a convenient stack memory, would be fairly easy to solve. I mean, we could probably assemble a kind of stack system, a byte reversing system out of a RAM and one processor.
But can you fit that on the board?
Yeah. And also it's kind of... I mean, admittedly we do... Like, we've got half a processor here that's in about the right place in the pipeline. Because the thing is that there's a point at which we start putting timing into things, which is essentially this processor, which handles reading the list of instructions from the RAM and sending it to the printer. And so it's kind of hard for anything after that to do anything useful, because it won't get to see, because we have to flip the 2 bytes of a line in order to reverse it. Anything after that won't get to see the bytes early enough to be able to swap them. So that kind of means that it has to be this one or something ancillary to it. Or something upstream of that handles the reversals. You know, I'm now wondering, like, do we just need to insert something in that bus there? I say just, blithely. As I desperately try to work out how I would. Because essentially that one, it's that thing writing into the RAM that sets everything up, and if we could have something that like kept track of where we were and handled by the reversals, that would do it. That, of course, though there at that level, of course, the reversals are slightly harder to implement, because you actually have to reverse the digits in a byte, whereas if we were able to do it inside this cluster, then those actually briefly handle individual digits. And in particular, so at the moment this thing works out the sequence of digits that it needs, but farms off the actual extraction over here in a kind of weird way that I think was like saving me one register over here. Basically, yes, in order that I don't trample on the accumulator here and can use it as a loop counter, I have to do the actual digit extraction on a different processor, slightly perversely. So I had thought about swapping those two bits around. So this one had the loop, and this one did the digit extraction. But it's kind of tricky because then how does this one fetch the next byte for processing? Since it's this one that fetches the next byte, it kind of is incumbent upon it to. Sorry, just wondering why it needs to be. It's kind of incumbent upon it to be the one that actually knows when to fetch the next byte. And since the digit extraction we will be doing is DGT X thingamy, we can't like inspect that incoming value sensibly. So I suppose we could have something that alternated between digit number and should I fetch another byte from the input. So if we then that would be like you would write no 3 no 2 yes 3 no 2 no 1 yes 3 no 2 no 1 repeatedly, or alternatively something more complicated in the case where you were trying to actually reverse things. So if we don't insist on redesigning things, then how would it go? Then we kind of need to have another loop that counted in the other direction, is the thing. I think our tests proved that DGT only works if you pass in not that one, scratch pad. That like if you pass in -2, that just returns 0. Yeah, so might be a useful fact, but it means that we can't use we can't like have something that counts down from -1, or I suppose -0 to -3. In the and hope to like thus be able, or rather counts up from -2 to 0, thus allowing us to use the same add or subtract or whatever instruction for doing things in both directions. Yeah. So that would have to revert, yes. And then we also have the swapping issue. So so if I wanted to have this one do the Well, Simon, you should know. You should notice at least that net looks terrible, and guess that the fix also needs to be applied to net slide.
And that's what Bruce pointed out.
I think I've completed a net slide. There are still puzzles in the collection I haven't completed. Sorry, we're getting distracted by things that aren't Shenzhen I.
Yes, in fact. Now I actually checked, and that's why it does look terrible at high resolution.
So, what would we want then? If we wanted to do this at this layer, we kind of want to signal so the thing is that it's that awkwardness of like loops are big and messy. Like it feels like the right place to do this is here, but it's difficult to do there because, as we've seen, we need that much code just to handle reversing those bytes that need reversing, and then we also need to do swapping and working out which things need to be swapped. And ideally we need to fit that into a processor small enough that we can squeeze it into a gap somewhere around here. And like this one obviously needs access to the ROM, and the ROM has two separate X-bus connections, so it's really hard to make it not be right next to the processor. So, right, the thing is, if we wanted to insert something, just getting that X-bus out is going to be painful. I mean, we probably want to shift that processor down here, these two up there. And then that would leave a space here that we could install the interposed processor. But the problem is, no, that might work. No, the problem is that this one needs too many X-bus connections that go to place it other places, and it would end up fouling lots of our other X-bus connections. There's a lot of irritating layout problems here. It would be lovely if would we be able to we can't really shift this one very far, and that has to go through that P1 because otherwise this track simply can't get out. And we've already proved that that attempting to move this vertically is just an utter nightmare. just as an experiment, what would happen if I were to want to? Oh God, no, that's not going to work. Put the ROM on the right-hand side of this processor.
Some Transformers goes monsters forearms.
But that doesn't work because obviously we have to wire up to those X-bus pins, which are too close to the edge of the board to be wired to. So it would have to go there, and then we have no way of getting
And also, Simon, clear tensor forms.
that signal out.
Sounds dangerously applied.
I mean, I suppose. So that is precisely the same arrangement, except that I've swapped those two around, to which one might ask, well, what on earth has that gained you? I think the kind of idea is that it's gained me a space here that this track passes through. No, track, not quack. But like I would need that to be able to connect to X-bus pins to that track, and
That's what surprised them, really.
that kind of, I can't see a way to do that. I mean, maybe we can do it with the 4000X because it's a bit more compact, but even there, like, we end up stuck between two simple I/O pins which we can't safely connect to. We can dump it there, but then we can't actually connect anything to the right hand pin, either of the right hand pins, because they crash into that X0 and X1. So like, while that's kind of prettier, and that could actually be moved up, arrive there, but that doesn't help because you really need 3 squares of width to be able to build anything interesting in. So I don't think that change gained me anything. So let's undo it all. This certainly looks cleaner, though it does mean that wiring anything to that is impractical. So what is, so there's also the thing that, like, the thing that really knows what direction the head's moving in is the thing that drives motor X, which is this thing here, in that line indicates it driving the carriage one way and that line indicates it driving it the other way. So if anything were to be in a position to, because even signal that we need when we need to reverse things, it would be that. So, but the slightly inconvenient thing, no, that's not Oh, that's fine. Yes, so we. So in theory, something could listen to motor X, which is even a signal we can get out. I mean, we can't get it out anywhere helpful at the moment, but it's not actually isolated on its side of the board. We could connect it to that and cause disaster. Because this also listens to motor Y to work out when to do certain things. So we could. I'm just thinking, how does whatever it is that handles the reversal know when to reverse? And like, either it has to start doing its own counting, or possibly it listens to that processor somehow. This one hasn't got any spare X-Bus ports for saying, hello, please can you reverse this number for me? Pondering whether things could be done. Here, because yes, I had thought about the possibilities of having more addresses in the ROM for things that don't, for reversed versions of things. So if we wanted, let's do Mach 1 X3s. There are two of them. What are they doing? I mean, clearly they're necessary because X-Bus being synchronous means that can't be sending things that this thing isn't reading. I'm just confused. I don't understand what those lines are doing. So the top left processor does what it obviously does and shovels. Surely we can do that more efficiently, Harris. Shovels 6 bytes of data through itself in 6 instructions. Then it sends a signal out to there. Oh, right, yes, of course. Those two signals to X3 are to wake up those two processors, both of which were sleeping, yes, right. But I'm just now pondering that shoveling all of the data through that processor, because could we not instead somehow have that short circuit this processor? Because like this one is essentially the only, I mean, we kind of cheat a bit. I wonder how hard we can cheat. But I'm kind of wondering what all the other test runs look like and how much I can cheat them. Because, like, most of what this processor does is just shovels data from one X-bus port to the other. And if we, like, connected those two the data input to this processor instead, it would mostly work. The only slight problem is that it would receive a -1 there and need not to do anything with it, or possibly need to signal to something else that it should do something with it. And there's a slight oddity that this thing's whole main loop runs once per incoming byte, and so I'm not sure it can easily do a thing the first time it runs, except it totally can. I mean, it's a bit short on X-bus ports in general, that. So there might be a slight trickiness if it were connected directly. It wouldn't have anything left to signal these two with. But on the other hand, it just feels that that's far too much. So thing is that if I have some kind of a bypass mechanism, then this thing needs to be able to know when it's meant to activate to start reading from here, unless we just assume. I mean, what if we go for the really we can't, well, I'm wondering, what if we go for the really extravagant assumption that that this thing can just that obviously the first reads and the first 6 reads from data are going to be something to print, and then the next one is going to be a reset signal. And so can this thing read like the first 6 and then do something else with the last one? It can't quite, simply because it has no sane means of counting to 6. Which is broadly what that's all about. Because this feels far too... I mean, like, I suppose we can just go... And that does reduce us from 6 instructions to 4 there. And still work correctly. Which I think helpfully means if we want to, we can do that. Right, so that's a bit more space. And in particular, we've now got enough room that we could stick a processor in here. Now we have got quite a bit of room there. Enough space that we could do that if we could think of something to put in it. But it's completely the wrong layer for that. Because even if we could, I mean, if it's interpreting things in the format they come along this bus, which is in the input format, it needs there aren't values of those for the reverse lines. So there isn't a sensible way to go actually dig something different out of the ROM. Obviously with another ROM we could do this, but that would need far too much space. Because in particular it's not safe to have other things fouling a ROM's address and data pins. In theory we could actually, but we've got just about enough space to do that and have things that wire to those pins if we could possibly think of a way to make that useful. Obviously we then have to be quite careful about everything fouling everything else. But so what do we need? We need alternate lines to somehow read, ideally, I mean it's only that section there, the extracting things from the ROM, that has to change things, because the lines that are all the same same digit, the same whatever it is, substance, don't need any special handling when they're reversed anyway. So if we wanted to do something like that, what would it look like? We'd need something to tell this chip whether it's in a forward or a reverse line. And it would have to ignore that in this case. So we'd probably just do something like we stuff that into DAT and then inspect it later. Stuff the direction into DAT and then test it, then inspect it later if we care. So just briefly doing a quick, is there some lovely arithmetic relationship in the few things that we have to be able to reverse? And no, there isn't, I don't think. In that we have to subtract two. I mean, we have to subtract. Oh no, not even 200, is it? Because we need to get that 3 down there. We subtract 197, or we add, or we multiply by 10, I suppose. Or we subtract 297. Not quite. Yes, 297. But like that's essentially 3 different things we could do. So the actual bit of that does anything is that section there, which is longer than the amount of space we have here, even if we're not doing anything else interesting. So what else? Feels slightly weird to be looking at the instructions at this stage, but this vague feeling there may be instructions I've forgotten the existence of. I'm just going to have a peer at the data sheets. Is there a not instruction? There is, yes. Because that's obviously the sensible way to implement, are we on a forward row or a reverse row? So if we imagine having this one do something like that, then it would signal for each row whether it's forwards or reverse, and then this thing could then do something conditionally on, are we on in a reversed row? So let's just try that and see what we end up with. I mean, I suppose the extreme version just goes so that should work basically the same, except that this thing interposes 0 and 100 in DAT, so you can see DAT there toggling in this processor here, toggling between 0 and 100 on alternate rows. I mean, strictly that could actually be done in here by going mov dat ac not mov ac dat, which is 3 instructions, but on the other hand saves an entire auxiliary processor. But I have uses for dat, because the point is that then I was thinking, if Now we haven't got enough space to do this. Don't think. Because then I'd want to have one of these be mov x0 dat, then mov x0 x2, then mov dat x2, instead of mov x0 x2, and so that needs 3 extra instructions. 3? Now 2. That's a really silly place to have that instruction. And then we want then to do that one, and then to do the mov dat x2 afterwards, and that would handle swapping the 2 bytes around, though it wouldn't handle reversing any individual bytes. So that doesn't quite sort things out. So what other things might we do? I mean, we might have this. I was wondering about negating the numbers if we're going backwards, but I don't think that actually helps us very much. In particular, because because if we negate them, then they end up negating the repeated digits, which then negates the which then ends up negating the individual digits, which then ends up with that fouling up. So you then have to bypass this code if we end up, or rather, unnegate the input for that section, which is surely going to be at least as messy as sending the line indicator on a separate byte. So yeah, I do really want to do this further downstream, ideally. Because yes, I want to insert the processing there. There isn't a way I can get that track out, is there? No. Don't think. No, you can't get through down there, Harris. I mean, that's the way I can see what's being written into the RAM from a processor up here. Except that, of course, if it's actually being written to the RAM, I can't see it. But I would need two connections to come down here, one to the RAM and one to the output of this processor, in order to actually manipulate the data as they go past. Now, I can't safely have either of those pins overlapping with that data pin. I mean, I suppose it does kind of occur to me that if I move this processor to the right, I might be able to get slightly more space. I can do that, but that doesn't actually give me much by way of usable space up there, because I need these two to be side by side, and there's basically nowhere I can put them with them side by side that's higher up to give me some space below them to interpose something on that track. And anything, up there. I mean, you can listen on X. We can drop in a new processor here that can listen to the input. Except that it can't. Oh, all right, yes, but it can listen to the input by listening on X3, I suppose. But it can't thus have any outputs. I suppose actually this one does. No, that one does use X1. It uses X1 to signal out there. And I'm not sure it can do anything useful there anyway. I don't think that set of changes helps at all. It'd be really nice if they did a version of the if they built an MC6000X that had 6 X-bus ports. Made life so much simpler. So much of the time I'm going, I just wish this processor had more X-bus, especially if you've got any RAM or ROM in the system. That does make me think. No, but there's no space. Ooh, or is there? Probably not. Right, another place we could interpose some fiddling is between. There's no space. Is between this thing and the ROM, which would have the interesting feature that we could wire up. No space. Wire up an auxiliary. Wire up this thing to the ROM via another processor by a single X-bus port, which will take addresses in one direction and send data in the other direction. But that's kind of intriguing. is there an interesting thing we can do there then? What was it? Like, it was a feeling that maybe I could get enough space in this processor to do interesting things by having something else handle some but not all of the lookup table stuff. I don't think that really works. All this space in this processor, but it's got no registers, so I can't have that handle a reversal. So what if somehow I can't fit another MC6000 up here? Because, oh, okay, I can, kind of. That's intriguing. As long as it doesn't try to use that X-bus pin. Right. And if I... Well, one thing I was thinking of was this thing that handles the digit extraction, if it could be a bit cleverer, could perhaps do something useful. And if I can move those two pins to those two, which I think I reasonably can, and then those two over to those two, then I could have this connected up to the other side of this. I mean, we can do that in terms of physical layout by going changing, so we except that one isn't going to this processor at all, is it? That one's going to this processor. So if we swap X1 and X3 in here, X1 becomes X3, X3 becomes X1, and we swap X0 and X2 in here, and I think that still works as badly as ever. But has the intriguing possibility that we might be able to turn that into an MC6000. And indeed we can move that, then move this processor slightly to the right. Well, that helps us very much. No thank you. So we could either make this an MC6000, I think, with a bit of fiddling, or we can make it two MC4000X's joined together. Like, I wonder if I can do anything with that. Probably don't need the two X-bus connections between them. I mean, two MC4000 have the same number of registers and slightly more instructions than an MC6000. But like similarly, we could go. like that, and have lots of space for extra instructions, and actually space for no, not quite space for sticking an MC4000 or MC4000X in that gap. Oh no, we can stick an MC4000X in there, can't we, if we want to? So, like, in really extravagant arrangements, we could do that. Like, surely we can do something with that much instruction space. Right, okay, what can I do with that lot then? Still got enough space to drop another processor in down here, if only it would wire up to anything in the process. You can actually move this one to the left, but I don't think that gains the same thing. So, at the moment this processor just handles digit extraction. So what if every two, it has to be and it gets, this thing currently signals it which digit it wants. So what could it do? Like, we kind of want it to go extract digit 321, extract digit 321, save the next value, read the next one, extract digit 123, but the thing is it doesn't quite have the timing information, because this is the one that actually handles that. That's look 1 in particular is the critical bit of timing information. Kind of makes me think, don't we want to connect something up here to the RAM output? But no, we don't, because the thing that does the timing has to be the thing reading from the RAM, because the RAM is sensitive to reads, as in it will give you something when you read from it. So you can't have anything, but you can't have a processor wait for reads. So this thing has to, if this thing is managing the timing, this thing has to be the thing talking to the RAM, and if it's not, it's kind of not this thing anymore. So at the moment, what does this thing actually do? Let's actually think about, because it is essentially we've now got 2 auxiliary processors that we can hurl data at and have them hurl data back again. You just need to think about what the data we want them to process are. So what does this one currently do? It currently has something that counts down 210. And oh, that's weird. I don't have any. Oh, but There is something weird going on. Yes, my voice appears to be appearing both on the output capture and on the input capture. Why is that happening? One moment. Is that the button I want? Oh, I want the weird advanced audio settings button, don't I? No, I'm not being monitored. Where is the output capture coming from? Do I just want to do that? Yes, that's better. I don't understand how the output capture works. It only barely ever does. Right. That should have fixed whatever weird thing's going on with the audio. Let me know if it didn't. So this thing, let me get this straight. This thing repeatedly, after waiting for a synchronizing signal, counts down from 2 to 0, and for each time it does something, it reads some data from the RAM, squirts it out there, and then squirts out its 210 number that it's been counting. So, and then like this bit is merely deciding whether to reset that counter. So that counter could perfectly well be any other counter we wanted. It could just count up from 0 the number of bytes that we're reading from the RAM and be used to do things. Or like the thing is, yes, we need to reverse the 2 bytes under some circumstances. So something we need to swap the 2 bytes, I mean, which means in particular that this thing as it stands is obviously not going to work properly, because it reads a byte, writes it out to the printhead, waits one time unit, reads the next byte. And obviously, as the 2 bytes have to end up at the printhead in reverse order, it had better not wait one time unit before reading the second one, because it needs to have managed to get it out to the printhead one time unit before that. So, if nothing else, we would need to arrange that this reads both bytes from the RAM, does something with them, writes byte out to the printhead, sleep 1, write byte out to the printhead, sleep 1. So then the only question is how much of... So that would suggest that either it reads from the RAM and sends out to these processors for processing, or it somehow knows itself which direction the printhead's currently moving in. And while that would be lovely and easy to sort out in a binary processor, because you just go its second bit up from the bottom, you can't really do that with a decimal processor like this. It's difficult to say is the current number 0 or 1 mod 4. Or I suppose we can count lines in this processor if that's easier, if it's now thinking in terms of pairs of numbers from the RAM. But even, is the current number even or odd, is an infuriatingly difficult thing to question to answer if you don't want to corrupt it in the process. But I suppose we can just use 0 or 1. We just go not each time. But this thing actually thinks in digits, not. So So that would suggest that this thing have a kind of design. Yes, when I said sleeping one time unit, of course, I meant shuffling out 3 digits separately and sleeping 3 time units each. So it's sleeping a time unit in between each digit. So what this could do, then is it doing anything? Like what I was thinking of, well, maybe it just reads 2 bytes in, squirts them out to the left, and then expects digits to come back from the left. But at that point, it's not doing very much, because this thing the thing to the left has to include all of the timing faff. And so what we've done is turn this into a very simple pass-through that does nothing and put all of the complexity one processor to the left, which is not helpful. We need this processor to do something, so that there's slightly less complexity in that processor.
Yes, if the whole byte jumps to the left and it sends each step to the right, then
yes.
it'll drive you... No.
So... I mean, it does do some things. It does, for instance, the stop doing anything when we're sending the carriage home and that kind of thing. So yes, currently this one handles much of the digit extraction by copying RAM into DAT and then into ACK and then extracting individual digits. But it doesn't actually do the extracting individual digits because that's done here. But this one handles the counting. So if we wanted to, let's make a small improvement if we can. So let's imagine that this one, rather than a loop that operates on every digit, somehow wants to have an inner loop that operates on every digit and an outer loop that actually understands where the carriage is currently going, which this one fundamentally doesn't. So, and the thing is, this processor understands where the carriage is going, but it doesn't talk about it much. This one really understands where the carriage is going, but it's next to impossible to hear what it's saying from over here. So if we had something really crude, like, would that work? The problem is, of course, if I want this to process, the thing is that there's not much thinking you can do at this level, because you've got ACK being the being used for the actual digit extraction, which means while the digit extraction is going on, we can't do much else. We can do I suppose it's actually easy to swap those around. We can have the digit we want to extract arrive later. Thing is, yes, this thing does need to understand whether to do which order to do the entire bytes in. We've got this like that. That's little enough that it could fit in there, which then means that the digit extraction doesn't need to, that this thing doesn't need to reverse digits, but it means that this thing still needs to pass. I mean, so like in really silly maneuvers, sorry, I'm now thinking. So if we imagine dat containing some kind of account of how many digits we've extracted, then, and if it's over 6, then we go then we send the number that we want to extract the digits from to our highly specialized digit reverser. Then we do the obvious faffing around. Then we I think I would probably mean TGT DAT 5. And 11. I mean, that has some new wrongness to it, which is kind of nice. Ooh. No, that doesn't quite work.
I have a completely stupid idea for doing this. Doesn't work.
That's nice. What was it?
I was just trying to go back from first principles and think about why it's difficult to byte reverse these things. And the problem is that there are no convenient instructions for digit reversing or the 3-digit numbers. And I thought, suppose instead you stored each pattern for a thing in the same digits of 6 successive memory entries, and then you could read them backwards with very little additional difficulty. This would work if, for a start, memories could run forwards and backwards equally easily. And
Which they don't.
secondly, the ROM was about 4 slots bigger.
Right, yes.
Before Simon disappears, I would like to say that the thing that's thrown me out of reality in its book on a luxury space liner with, artificial gravity and stuff, is the bollocks someone was talking about encryption. Okay, it was technically a throwaway line, but I looked at it and went, ah.
So, right, yes, good. I haven't made things any worse by doing this, in that it's still only the backwards lines that go wrong. And yes, it is correctly feeding the backwards lines through this processor here. Whether it's doing the correct thing with them is a slightly different matter. So I did have thought that, of course, this is an arbitrary, albeit fairly small, lookup table, and can we make it actually do the swapping of the bytes as well at the same time? Are there few enough bytes that need to be swapped? And the answer is no, blatantly there aren't, because it only handles 3 values, and we have to be able to swap 300 and 303 and 11 and 10 and 311 and 313 and 121 and 212, and yeah, it doesn't work. So we still need to do. So I think this now means that, I mean, we could check. Let's carefully inspect the 2 lines that have ended up wrong. So that one came out as, so this 2, 1, 4 were correct. Then there's meant to be a second 4, which came out as 1, 1, 3, 3, 1, 3, 1, 1, 3, 3, 1, 3, whereas it should have come out as 3, 1, 3, 1, 1, 3. So yes, that has correctly, and similarly this one ended up coming out as with its 2 bytes. We should be able to actually see this, shouldn't we? That low high is what we should have had second, and high low high is what we should have had first. So this is correctly dealing with the digit reversals, and this thing is correctly scheduling the digit reversals. Taking advantage of DAT as a counter of where we are in the printing some of the time. Actually, it should be all of the time. Where does it end up as a 3? I think because we try to print an extra blank line at the top. But we still need to be able to swap digits correctly. So what would that look like? At the moment, this one loads up a byte from RAM and stuffs it into DAT, and then does it? And ACK meanwhile counts which byte in the RAM we're currently extracting. 210 210 210 210. So if it needs to swap the bytes, that's quite difficult because it doesn't have a spare register to stick the byte that we've already read out of the RAM but that we don't need yet into. Or just briefly glancing at layout again and going, is there any space I can use for something silly? If I could find a way not to need that connection, that would allow us to pull off some slightly neater things. So this thing obviously doesn't. Well, this thing doesn't have a spare register either. Because its AC is used for actual extraction and its DAT is used for counting to work out when we should start doing reversal. And like, don't think there's anywhere we can tack on another processor for the purposes of handling byte swapping. Though this one does have like a small amount of spare space, but it doesn't really have anywhere to handle counting the bytes that need to be swapped. Because like I suppose it does have the convenience that it's alternating, but we tried to work out how to insert the alternation into there and there isn't really the space. I mean, to be fair, oh no, it does. I was about to say it doesn't use AC, but it doesn't require AC and it could use DAT. But no, it has those two mulls that obviously only operate on AC. I mean, kind of intriguingly, this one, yes, we had this before, didn't we? This one does actually know what cycle we're on, but doesn't actually have any space to transmit AC doesn't have any instructions spare to transmit AC anywhere. And it feels like that I'm slightly engaging in putting far too much code in to compensate for bad board layout. So yeah, it's really this one that wants to be doing the byte swapping, as in swapping over the 2 bytes. But it doesn't have anywhere to stash the bytes that it's not, the byte that it wants to put in second when it's doing them backwards. And it doesn't have any spare X-bus ports where it can temporarily write that byte. And just for good measure, the byte is too big to be written out to a simple I/O port. And it doesn't even connect to the address on the RAM, so it can't rewind the RAM. Theoretically, it can run it forwards to get back to a previous entry, but that's obviously going to take far too much code. So essentially all it can do is push the wrong byte that way. But the thing is that these only ever sleep when they're waiting for their next input, which kind of makes it hard. Yeah, I don't think that one can save it, and this one has no spare registers again. So can... So that then makes me feel like we want to do byte swapping here, where we have spare registers-ish. I mean, like there we can stuff that thing into DAT, and then all we need to do is swap those two instructions sometimes. The problem is with that sometimes, because we can't really tell like where we're currently writing, so we don't have a convenient counter in this processor that will tell us which byte we're currently processing, and this one knows, but doesn't actually know in a very useful way. And we tried using DAT for that, but that causes its own kinds of problem. Namely, that we then also want to be able to use DAT for this, as it were. I suppose we don't have to. That can actually be ACK, can't it? Yes, that was how far we got last attempt. So that means that DAT is available as a counter. It's just such a pain to count with DAT. So kind of what I want. I mean, that counting there is also very flappy. So, in that we've got this like copy DAT into ACK, add one to it, copy it back again. Kind of, yeah. So I'm just kind of pondering things. This one could easily signal to this one, which whether we're in a an odd or even row. And this one could do like a test on a read from that XBus port to tell it which row it's on, and therefore maybe tell it something about what it should be doing next. But fundamentally, neither of these has the spare registers to do the byte swapping. So if we were to want to do that, we would need to find enough space to stick an additional processor in just to give us a register for the byte swapping. This one has the register for the byte swapping, but doesn't have a counter to indicate whether it's currently on an odd or even row. And that's basically the only reason why this one can't do the byte swapping. It's got plenty of instructions spare. It's just that if I try to do all of the counting in DAT, then it can't it can't it doesn't have the instructions spare then, because doing all the counting in DAT is very, very costly, because we have to do mov dat ac not mov ac dat and the test and a couple of instructions that are the actual byte swapping, and because we're doing we probably have to add an extra jump as well to cope with the fact that we're already using the condition flags for something, and so then we end up with 7 extra instructions, and we don't have 7 extra instructions in here. If on the other hand some of that counting could be palmed off, and like this processor does the counting anyway, because it has to count up to 6 now. So like in an ideal world we could just stick in a mov ac x0 in this processor's main loop, and that would be enough for this one to go is ac okay. Working out is ac even is kind of painful. Is this incoming datum even is kind of painful. So I want somewhere to squeeze in. I want somewhere to squeeze in a processor that can do the even odd line counting for this processor, but this one has no X-bus ports spare anyway. Thinking about layout, if I wondering whether I can stick the RAM up there, but that does make connecting it to let me just experiment. So it needs basically 2 data connections. Yeah, then that data connection can't be wired up. Well, you say that. Technically it can. want to know how this works. So then that now gets its input signal on X0. This thing now reads the RAM using X2. It then writes to that thing using X3. Right, well that's terrible. Lots of wires running through things that it doesn't quite matter that they connect to. And then you go, why on earth, Ben, have you done this? And the answer is, well, that does allow for the thing that I was asking for earlier. Namely that. We can interpose a processor between this and that RAM. Which could, in theory, do the byte swapping. Which I think could, in practice, do the byte swapping. So I bet it doesn't have enough instructions. Or does it? Okay, that's still utter rubbish. What? So what does this end up writing into the RAM? So the first row is correct. Second row is correct, unsurprisingly. And the third row... so which row was wrong? Let's just let it fill in the RAM. Actually, let's just let it run, and then we'll look at what the results were. No, let's not let it run that long. Let's stop it. Just before it resets, so that we can actually see what the output looked like, because it was a complete disaster. And I'm really confused by that. So it output the correct number of rows. 1, 2, 3, 4. No, it didn't. 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, 5, 5, 6, 6. Okay, so some of the things it was meant to write out, it didn't. That has the correct number of... That has 4 reads from X1 and 4 writes to X2, so it should pass on the same amount of data. So what did this look like in terms of the actual data we got? All 2s, good. All 1s, good. 311, 313, which should be a 4, and then we should get those two in reverse order. We don't, we just get 311. So that should have done 311, 313, 313, 311, 222, 222. So it started out all right, but then it started dropping things. That's odd. Indeed, precisely. So it wrote out a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of the 12 outputs. So 3 out of 4 of them. Which looks like it's skipping 1 in 4. Except that the first 4 definitely get through okay. Okay, well let's actually follow that then. So it should output 222, 222. 222, 222, 222, 222. That will work correctly. Then it should output 111, 111. 111 goes in, 111 comes out, the second 111 comes out. Third one is one that goes via the ROM, and we're on a forwards line, so 311 in, 311 out, 313 in, 313 doesn't come out. Right, arg. Doesn't come out? Or comes out but doesn't. So, 222, 111, 111. So, a 311 goes in and a 311 comes out. And then a 313 goes in and a 313 comes out, but gets soaked up by that thing, because of course, even though it's not doing anything useful, it is still connected to that X bus. So, can we move this processor 1 square to the left so we can move the RAM 1 square to the left? Yes, we can. Except now we can't connect something to that pin, damn it. Because of this inconvenient track. So that's the one that we want to connect up to that D pin. But we can't do that because that track's in the way. Because that's having to dodge around that pin, which is completely unused, but we aren't allowed to connect a pin of a processor to another pin of the same processor, even though we can connect to an equivalent pin on a different processor. We can't swap the D pins around because that doesn't help. I mean, this is essentially only used for telling this processor when to stop printing. Let's just temporarily disconnect it and see if that gives us everything else working properly. Right, so that works with the one exception that this processor runs on when it finishes, when it should stop. Because the signal to send, the signal that tells this one that printing is finished, which is meant to arrive on P1, is no longer connected. Now, obviously, if we could get this one to send that signal on P0 as well as P1, then that would solve that problem, but that's not going to work. And this has to be connected to a pin on the right hand side of this processor. So the question is there anything else or anywhere else that can tell that we can say expect to tell us to stop printing? Like, can we get some sentinel value? I mean, we've got a spare slot in the ROM, so there are values that we can send from here that will give us, that we can arrange to give us any value we like in the RAM. And conveniently, like, that would be a trivial, if we had a sentinel value in the RAM, that would be a trivial thing to have this thing pick up here. That MOVX2 DAT, we've got it in DAT, we've got the value in DAT, we could do a teak there, and we could basically reintroduce those instructions testing for a sentinel value in the RAM. To do that, we would need to, though, to add an extra byte at the end of the packet, which would mean we'd need to be able to squeeze one more instruction into this processor, because this one does one main loop per byte in the packet and can't count how many bytes there have been in the packet. And this one has no spare XBus ports for monitoring A0, which would be the other way to do that. Because it's busy getting a synchronization signal in there, talking to the byte reversers, the digit reversers, digit swappers there, and digit extractors, getting data out of the RAM there and sending the data to the output decoder there. So really, if I could work out how to squeeze one instruction out of this, that would solve all my problems. And it currently, like, the obvious thing that feels slightly wasteful so at the moment this one works by wait for input byte, copy 6 bytes out to there, then send -1, then wait for the next input byte and send it over to there. Or rather, after you've copied all 6, then send a synchronization pulse to 2 different destinations, and then wait for another thing and send it just to one destination. And then, so the obvious redesign of that is something whose main loop is just sleep and copy data across, but that doesn't really work. Well, that doesn't help me, because that then loses it the ability to count, which is what we were depending on it for in the first place. So that was just me checking that the inputs are always guaranteed to be 6 bytes long. They are. So this counting to 6 is an acceptable way to find the end of the packet. Because the entertaining thing about XBus packets is you can't see the end of them. You just find that the next read blocks. So while we might be able to rewrite this as sleep, see what the next value is, and either treat it as a thing to send on to here or a thing to send on to here, that screws up all the synchronization systems. So can we simplify that bit? So currently at startup, both of these processors are sleeping, waiting for input on X1, which will arrive once enough of the input packet has been processed. And then it writes two things which, in some undetermined order, wake up both of those processors. Actually, it's rather interesting that they both come out of the SLXX0 simultaneously. So the availability of a value causes them to unsleep. But then one of them needs to read it. That's intriguing, isn't it? And as long as one of them reads it, that's all we need. So, top left processor writes that one. Both of these two drop out of sleep. Now, there's a 1 sitting on the X bus, and it is critical that someone read it. And if two people read it, that would be bad. But as long as only precisely one of them reads it, that's acceptable. And only one of them pays attention to the value. So if we remove that instruction and remove that instruction, I think this will still work. So, I mean, it still obviously has the known failure, but that synchronization at the start, once 6 bytes have been fed through the decoder, one byte gets sent, both of those right-hand processors drop out of sleep, one of them reads the byte off the X bus so that this one doesn't hang. And we've got one spare instruction here. We've also got some spare instructions here if we need them. So now what we do is, before that, we send a special sentinel byte at the end of the packet. Now the special sentinel byte needs to map to -1 here, which I think means it's one more than the maximum value we can have in a packet. The maximum value we can have in a packet is 8, so we want to send a 9. So we sent a special 9 out. So now this loads up the RAM with the actual data, and then we send a 9. Which doesn't work. Or is that still processing 1 byte earlier? Ah, here they come. Here we get a -1 going into the RAM. Now that's not very helpful at the moment, because we don't have anything to detect it. So if we let this rip... What? Okay, who's hanging? I haven't just landed on a breakpoint, have I? Is there a breakpoint somewhere? No. That one's blocking on read. Intriguing. Oh, because it needs an extra SNXX1, because now we have an odd number of rows. Right. So it doesn't really help, because we now just run into those -1s. But now we can change this to teak ac -1 plus sleep forever, and this might work. Shall we see? It doesn't work. Damn, what went wrong? Because I seem to have a MOV2 act, which is obviously not going to work. We want to teak dat -1. Right, try that again. So close! Still didn't work. Right, what went wrong that time? So, like, it printed the right thing. But that's all good. Everything's fine up until this point. We've even landed on that slip 999, but we've landed on it one instruction late. What? Okay, so what's that last bit that we output? Oh, that's us not resetting to 0. Right. You can fix that. There. Maybe this will work. Crossing several fingers. Yes! Right, okay. Now we get to discover whether any of the other test cases do anything difficult. Success. Curiously, my histograms are terrible because, well, I've just been throwing processors at this until it started working. Like, as I said an hour or so ago, an awful lot of my board layout, of my coding here, has been constrained by my board layout. I eventually removed the track that was causing much of my unpleasantness, which resulted in some even weirder coding. And that last change was just silly. So yes, the last change, which I didn't really narrate, was that because the printer outputs are generated from something which continuously generates an output once you've asked for it, the last output it generated kept being generated when the print head moved to the next line right at the end, which caused it to output one incorrect pixel. So I just arranged that it outputted to 0, and because we have a little while before it really matters that this processor shuts down, it could wait it was okay for it to wait that extra instruction and get the -1 slightly later. We don't need that post-it note anymore because that post-it note is actually copied into that processor, so we'll drop that one off the board. Right. So yes, huge success. And actually, looking at it, it looks like the start time of the first packet is fixed. So possibly we could have simplified a few other things. Like now that I know that, I know that the various synchronization pulses might be unnecessary. Actually, probably not, because we do still need to. We do still need to wait until the RAM has something useful in it within the first time slice. Anyway, let us go back to our email and see what the reply is. A recommendation of another thing to read from Sun Hao Tian. Existence Within by Orbis Hua. In some sense, all existence is existence within a time, within a place, a physical body. What are the limits of our minds? What might it be like to exist without a body, outside of oneself? This book attempts to answer these questions. Unfortunately, without direct experience, these topics can only be explored through conjecture and imagination. The real answers will come in time. There are new forms of consciousness out there waiting to be realised. Thank you. How chat. We're almost there. We need just one more solution to tie all of these pieces together. A board that routes information to and from each neural processor, and one that we can manufacture at scale. Irina, side note for you, there are going to be a lot of these to power. A lot. Right. Logos data and telos data are X-bus inputs connected to neural processors. Logos pump and telos pump are simple outputs connected to the neural processor circulatory pumps. Mesh data is an X-bus output connected to a neural mesh network. Neural processors Logos and Telos will occasionally emit data packets consisting of 4 data values and 1 checksum value. If the checksum matches the data, forward the entire packet to mesh data. The circulatory pumps on Logos and Telos must be activated every 5 time units. When a data packet is received from a neural processor, activate the corresponding pump immediately and reset the data delay until the next automatic pump activation. To validate the checksum of a data packet, start with the first value, subtract the second, add the first, subtract the fourth, add the fifth, and so on. When reaching the final value, of which there are 24, add it. If the total sum is 0, the packet is valid, otherwise the packet has been corrupted and is not valid. But there is a note for extra fun, I think, yes. We only have room for 1 track connecting the pump side and the data side of the 2 processors, which means that whether each neural processor should be pumped or not is controlled, has to be done non-independently, at least somewhat. And we have to cache the entire data packet before we send it, and it's far too big to fit in a RAM without some encoding. But conveniently, all of the numbers are single digits, so like maybe we don't need to. And oh god, there is no way I'm starting that tonight, even though I've got an hour before I would usually stop. I have, of course, got another printer I'm trying to design, though. But this one I don't even know is possible. How far did I get? Well, apparently I got to something that just crashes. So I haven't looked at this for some time. So I'm now just staring at it, trying to remember how it works. So that one only writes to, thus the carriage output processor. That one is meant to be handling line feed outputs. What the hell do we have 2 RAMs for? So is this thing then constructing the carriage movement instructions, and this thing is constructing the daisy wheel movement instructions, and then these guys read those 2 RAMs in order to get their instructions, and we kind of somehow hope the timing works. I mean, that seems like a hopeful design. Yeah, smoked mackerel is good, and I haven't had it for far too long. Right. So what I'm wondering, I mean, apart from the fact that this is currently not working, is, as I recall, my big problem was that the total time that that each processor has to, each output has to wait, is the minimum of the time taken for the carriage movement and the time taken for the wheel movement. So what this has done is, upon receiving 81, it's scribbled (3 minus 4) into this RAM, which I think means 3 minus 4, and it's scribbled 020140 into there. So what's that? Is that 02 1 01? I don't quite know what that encoding is. So that expects a synchronizing signal on X0, on X1, sorry. We do know more about how to do synchronizing signals now, don't we? Because we know that actually, as long as something reads from an X bus, everything can be synchronized by it, which allows for the possibility of having a single synchronizing bus, which might be interesting. So ooh, intriguing. So what is this doing then? All right, so this contains both carriage return and line feed information. So that's 0, which means no line feed, move carriage forward 2. 0, no line feed, move carriage forward 1. What? That was a good start. 4, which surely is the amount we have to move the carriage back. 0, only surely that should be like 1, 4 or something. So what does this actually do? It does some weird synchronization dance I'm not going to try to understand. Then loads ACK with X with the first byte, sends the second byte to the carriage control processor, and then if the first byte was 4, and then sends the first byte to the carriage control processor, and then emits a line feed pulse if it was 4. The carriage control processor therefore expects to receive pairs of bytes. That first bit is corresponding with that synchronization stuff. In that it expects some signal on X1 and passes it on to X0, and then does then reads 1 byte from X0. Alright, yes, reads 2 bytes from X0 that control what kind of pulse it generates. Right, yes. So 4-0 is a -4 pulse, and this one recognises -4 pulses and uses them, and it also issues a line feed. Right. I'm just about going to be able to understand this by the time I decide to go to bed, aren't I? But I reckon we can do better now. So that one is blocked waiting for a read from there. Which looks like it's already some kind of synchronization bus. So maybe rather than debugging it, we just rebuild it better. So this one, the wheel output processor, currently sends a null to X1. So it expects to get a signal in on X1, but does nothing with it. This thing looks like it's the one that actually handles. So this thing waits for a signal in on X0, and when it gets it, forwards it to X1. So that X0 is this thing's X2, So is that, when does that happen then? So yes, that gets sent when we have something to print. And it then forwards that to X1 and then hopes for a reply on X1 and then waits again on X1 and does something with the result because this thing can't see the RAM. Meanwhile, because that sent something on X1 there, that will then be read by one of these two. But actually it won't, because this one never reads X1. So those will both be woken up. So once all of the RAM has been set up, which like maybe I should have set a breakpoint for, both of this processor wakes up, the hammer output processor wakes up. It thus wakes both of those two, of which one reads from the X bus. And then it hopes for something to come back in on X1. It throws one of them away. And uses the other one to generate an output pulse. Because both of those send it a signal when they're ready. So what's going wrong again? It's just at the moment when it should be firing the hammer. This one is trying to read from that, even though this one is trying to read from that. I think. Oh no, that's already hit that gen. So why did that pass that Slux X1 if there was nothing ready to be read?
Those look completely unthanked and unused to you.
Probably. I mean, they have been used, of course.
I know, but
Sometimes things don't get properly cancelled.
I'll just put it in the for the best.
So let's just step through this again. Well, I mean, actually, we're interested in what happens So let's just check that this is all as we expect. This one, the hammer processor, is waiting to read from X1. Is sleeping on X1, which is what we want. These two are each emitting their output pulses. The carriage output goes low first, and so it sends a signal to the hammer processor saying that it's ready, which gets consumed by the hammer processor. The hammer processor then sleeps on X1 again, waiting for the wheel processor to be ready, which it now is. And the problem is that the carriage processor is now hoping for the next signal to come from the hammer processor to say, please process the next byte. And because we're trying to use this X bus bidirectionally between three devices, obviously unhappiness is going to ensue. Right, yes. Okay, I understand what's going on, and I understand how it's going wrong. And I think I'm going to assume that I don't want to try to touch much of the upstream stuff. But fundamentally our problem is that these two processors need to signal to this one, and then need not to, but then if they end up waiting for it to signal back to them, they may hear one another instead. So the question is there a better way for them to handle that communication, given that, like, they don't have much time, they don't have any spare X-bus ports for this job. I'm not sure if we're planning to brain slug the entire world. I think we may merely be inventing a apocalyptic AI of some sort. Just looking at my board layout here and going, what are you on, Harris? Pretty sure I can condense this area a bit. Like, if I put these two processors up one and these two processors down one, then suddenly all the X-bus ports would line up. But I'm not sure that helps me very much, unless I can really shuffle things around to try to gain myself enough space that we could drop an extra column of processors in. I'm inclined to try just doing some relayout to make this a bit less ugly. Okay, there's a short pause while I find somewhere I can safely put this post-it note. I can't have it sticking out that far off the board. I can't put it down there. There aren't many other gaps. Curiously, this wasn't a problem I had with the neural printer. Right. Let's just temporarily remove the post-it note while I shuffle processors around. Actually, let's just temporarily put the contents of the post-it note there. There's a convenient place where I can jam that important information. Right. So I can move this one up by 1. And I think, and then do some light rewiring. So it ought to be the case that it's X2 goes down to there and to something on this one, and its X3 just goes to something on this one. I think that means we want to swap X0 and X1 on this processor. So that instead of X3 going to X1 on what? Let me get this right. Instead of X3 going to X0, it goes to X1, and X2 goes to X0. Right, so that does the same thing, still crashes in the same way. What? That still crashes in the same way, but it's missing that connection. Yes, because that's actually an unnecessary connection. Nothing in there actually talks to X2. I mean, we can reconnect it to X2 later, but so then I think we can swap X0 and X1 around in this one again while moving that down by 1. Oops. No, wrong button. And insofar as that activity has a point, it's that then I can move that processor left by 1. And then if I need to, also move that processor left by 1. But similarly, obviously this one can be hoisted up 1 row. That track can be moved that way. And then that processor can be moved left a bit as well. And that then makes it possible to move this RAM left. And like this might be useful because it gives us then 3 columns of space in this gap, which like is enough for an entire extra processor if we need it. Let me do a bit more tidying up. If I swap X0 and X1 in this one, I think we can rewire that more easily. Which then means that that one can be routed that way, which means we can discard that bridge. Right. Not sure if that's helpful, but we've got a big patch of space here now, which we could use if we wanted to do something with it. Like maybe that could be. Maybe we can stick some synchronization gubbins in there. Or maybe, for instance, we can drag this processor way over to the left. No, we can't drag it far enough to the left, sadly. Yeah, there may actually be nothing we can do with this space. I suppose one thing we can do is we can stick that post-it note back, can't we? There we are, right. So our problem here is this synchronization system, which doesn't work. Because the way the synchronization system's meant to work is like each of the outer processors sleeps waiting for the middle one to say go, and then the middle one sleeps waiting for each outer processor to say done. But the problem is that those done signals, that once a processor has said done, it then has to wait for another go, but it can misinterpret a done from the other processor as go. Now, of course, one approach to this would be to make the signals the same, because after all, most of the time, a done means you immediately need a new go. But the thing is, there is a point at the end of each line when that's not the case, and correspondingly at the start of the line. So the current situation, and so yes, the awkwardness here is that many of these processors only have one spare X-bus pin. So one question is, with the extra space I've just made, could I, like, pull one of them over to the left and therefore replace two of them with MC6000s? Like, as a thought experiment as much as anything, if I had an MC6000 here, it could have P1 wired up to there, some X-bus pin would be connected there. The difficulty would be that that one wouldn't be able to work properly. But actually, its X-bus pin needs to connect to the RAM, doesn't it? So Now going, can we condense things more by swapping this RAM and that processor? Because that then lines up those X-bus pins with those X-bus pins. So this processor does use all 4 X-bus ports, so maybe not. Maybe actually that weird interleaving there is quite efficient. Because otherwise it can't go here, because while that X0 would connect up to X3, its X1 would end up colliding with that X2 where it really wants to connect to the data port on that RAM. So we have to have that spacing, and indeed we would have to have more spacing if we actually wanted to swap them over. Right. So, yes. It's a very simple problem now, isn't it? And like, that could easily be fixed if we had slightly more X-bus available. But there's a problem. The problem is really that these ones signal. Is it that they signal and listen on the same pin? Or is it that this one signals and listens on the same pin? I'm not sure it really matters. It's that we can't have two separate... Like, if we had the go and ready signals on two separate three-way X buses, this would all work fine. So is there some way we can get this synchronization to behave itself? Like where we can... So if we... So the one slight problem is that essentially whichever one of these outer processors finishes second, it needs to not wait for its companion to finish. But if it finishes first, it does have to wait for its companion to finish. So if we imagine, for instance, the outer processor sending two ready signals, one to be consumed by the hammer processor and one to be consumed by the other outer processor, then the problem would be that the outer processor that finished first, trying to send its ready signal, or its done signal rather, basically the same, would find that there was no one listening to one of the two signals. Because that signal was not... Because the other one would... Hang on. No, the second one would... Yeah, the first one would find that the other processor wasn't waiting for it, and you can't sleep waiting to be able to write. And because two of these read from the RAM, they can't possibly wait for that, and they don't have any other X-bus ports. So does that mean that this... No, that doesn't work. I mean, I suppose it could be listening on this. Now going, is there some way that we could do this by like having the hammer be the AND of two signals, two simple outputs from these two? So that then, I mean, that would require quite a bit of careful relayout. Still can't sneak that down there, sadly. Neither, despite what looks like an enormous gap, can I read that line up there. Not that would help much. That's actually unhelpful. I'm kind of considering if we had like a hammer signal from each of these and then just an AND gate in the middle. Could these two somehow notice when that's ready? This would obviously require that P0 be available. Which is kind of tricksy. I don't know how to put that there. Yes. So, if we wanted to, I don't know that it would do us any good for any purpose. We can have that kind of signalling between those two instead, or as well. It's kind of thinking if we can have the so how could we make this work better then? Is there some way we can have some protocol for handling this X bus that will work correctly? kind of fear not. Maybe we can do it by silliness. Like, can we instead transmit to this processor something that says whether how much time to wait, and this one just takes max of the 2 times. Like the wired OR nature of simple I/O pins feels like it could be of some help to me, but the problem is that if we wire them together, then they'll all give the same output. So we'd need a buffer, and we don't have suitable buffers, and yeah, mess. And they're all using gen, so we can't have them easily gen on multiple outputs without lots of extra instructions. As in, we'd need a MOV either side of each gen. We don't have very many spare instructions. So the general, approach of these is they sleep on... So each of those does sleep on X1 and later send something to X1. So the big problem is that this processor uses the same X1 for both. And that means that their outputs are wired together. So if this processor was so big that it had more X-bus pins, that would solve the problem. But, like, squeezing it in is quite tricky. Because okay, that may not be a complete disaster. Doesn't have quite enough exposed X-bus though, because I've brought a shiny new processor with 4 X-bus pins and promptly lost 2 of them. Like, we could kind of do that, except for the slight problem of connecting up that pin. And the absence of horizontal jumpers. Horizontal bridges. But that doesn't actually gain us anything, because in order to do this, we've had to be willing to sacrifice that X-bus pin to sit on that track, and that X-bus pin to sit on that track. And there's like the additional problem that we really can't get those X1s out anywhere, because there's this solid wall of pins on the left hand side of these chips. And we can't even move them far enough left to be able to fit more chips on their right hand side. So conceptually, if we ignore the layout problems, if I wanted to make hammer... It is basically hammer that's the problem. Be generated just by doing an AND of 2 outputs, which could be a inverted wired OR if we felt like it. Then then how would that work? Each of the processors generating it by whatever means, like they've all got P0s, maybe we can find a way to wire those up, would signal that at some point in a time unit, and then it would have to like sleep until such time as at the start of a time unit the actual hammer output was high. Which would be quite tricky to do. Yeah, I don't think that's going to work well, because they would then have to read their output pin, which would cause it to stop outputting, and it would have to then thus have to be wired ORed, and well, that would kind of work, I suppose. So if it were a wired OR that we then inverted, so these two would have their output high most of the time and would pull it low when they were ready to fire the hammer, then after pulling it low, they would then, the plan would then be that they would sleep and then each release the line and check if it's still low. But that would of course mean that they both simultaneously release the line unless we added an extra no-op somewhere, which would mean more code. And then if in that case, then they would each be able to check whether the other one was holding it low. But that's not going to work well. While it might be amusing to try to insert one of these somewhere, I mean, it would have the odd consequence that it would basically have only one out. It would be an AND gate, but possibly doing some extra cleverness. But again, we don't have enough pins on these processors. So, like, the alternative is that something knows the full, is that both sides, ideally, know the full length of the sequence and know how to wait. The thing is that so that would require, for instance, adding after MOV 50p1 somewhere a sleep for an amount of time that we read, and essentially the same thing here, which you will observe we don't have any space for. Well, I mean, not so bad actually. That SLXX1 might be able to be somehow. The thing is, it does have to be an SLXX1 at the start of the line, because we don't know how long we're going to have to wait for. And it's only after we've got that we can know what we're waiting for. So that suggests that the timing information, if there's going to be any, should be handled here. But this... So that then comes back to my earlier plan of can this thing somehow accumulate the timing data. So the idea would be that it signals that something at the start of, so that it would signal out of X1 go and expect to immediately read two values from X1, which would be the lengths of the pulses that these two would be generating. But that's actually quite hard because they don't really know that. Like this one only reads the length of its low pulse after it reads it straight into a gen instruction. So it never even sees it in its accumulator to do anything with it. This one at least does load things into its accumulator. And there's a slight question of why these two have different command sets, and can we make them the same? And of course we need to know that the hammer should only fire, well, really when the wheel processor is finished moving. That may not be too much of a problem. Well, it's 1:45 and I haven't actually progressed, except that I've tidied this up a bit and vaguely got back to understanding how it works. So for now I'm going to cease hacking at this and go to bed, because I don't think I can come up with anything good in the next quarter hour. So farewell to that, and we will be back maybe on Friday, or maybe Verity will be playing Crusader Kings 3 on Friday, I don't know. We'll see soon. So yes, good night, and we'll see you later.